make yourself redundant, I think that's when you start building an institution. 3 out of 5 babies in our TG are actually born under the Cloudnine banner, right? It's also a tremendous responsibility on us to continue to do good, right? Good entrepreneurs should not going through this much struggle to raise capital.
Which part of the sales is harder, like selling to founders or selling to the LPs who invest in the fund? If you're a parent, then you would have surely heard of Cloudnine. It is one of India's largest chain maternity hospitals, and the man who built up Cloudnine from a single center to a pan India chain is Rohit. Rohit is now running PeerCapital, a venture fund which is funding businesses that enable the India consumption story. And in this episode, he talks all about building for India. I'm your host, Akshay Dutt, and this is the Founder Thesis podcast. Rohit, welcome to the Founder Thesis podcast. Where did you grow up, Rohit? What's your origin story?
I grew up in not just Bangalore, but south of Bangalore. So much so, Akshay, that everything that has been influencing over my life, from all forms of education to first work to first entrepreneurial gig to Cloud9 to everything, was all in south of Bangalore. I mean, I don't know if it is privileged, I don't know if it is stupidity, but it just happened to be so that I never ventured out of this realm of South Bangalore. So yeah, all my life in Jayanagar in Bangalore.
Okay, got it. Okay. And what did you do in terms of education? What led up to you becoming a part of Cloud9?
Well, honestly, I think it's a little bit of right place, right time, if you ask me, Akshay. One, building up to Cloud9, I graduated as a computer science engineer, worked with tech majors like Intel and then SAP. SAP was a far longer gig where, I got to understand the implementation aspects of a large ERP like SAP, which only a very, large companies could actually afford to implement SAP. Uh, was just lucky enough to be on part of a lot of implementation projects and was getting very excited looking at how users are thinking about their decision making. And, especially being part of an ERP implementation, you can not just look closely at what the user is doing, but you can also zoom back up to understand the ripple effects across the nuts and bolts of the company, right? So, I don't know, I was just getting excited with a lot of these things. Way back in 99, when I was 18, my dad had pushed me and my brother to actually start taking up the first attempt of running a business. This was in consumer electronics retail. Nothing fancy, but it just grounded us very differently in terms of understanding the nuances of business. So, the reason I'm telling you about that is even during professional sort of engagements, the aspiration and the ambition was to always kind of do more, understand more, and somewhere that it was always kind of, there to be scratched, right? And soon had to give in to it. Came back out, started my own entrepreneurship bandwagon again. Came back onto it. Was scaling a very popular large F&B brand in Bangalore to multiple locations. Was having a lot of fun. But a large part of my family is filled with doctors, on my mom's side especially. And a maternal uncle of mine, basically his wife and my mom are sisters. They were coming back from Australia, and Dr. Kishore, our founder and chairman, he's someone who's very obsessed with intricacies of outcome, especially in the healthcare context of what is happening. And his main focus was he's a neonatologist, so everything to do with mother and child. And he was always someone who would be very fussed about the data. And one of those realizations was in terms of how far back India is in terms of infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, and if there was something that could be done towards at least making an attempt to change that narrative, right? So it started with his vision to kind of be able to bring something in which is world class, single-minded focus of just going into mother and child as a sector, doing something that no one has done before. And I was just there around, and I think they just took pity on me and said that, hey, do you want to come and help us out? And for me it was a challenge, because I one, to not have a playbook of any of these sorts, really not knowing what to do, trying to find the first of everything. Was a very very unique opportunity and a challenge. Got excited by it, joined hands, started trying to think beyond the clinical realm of what Dr. Kishore wanted to try and bring in. It was a very family affair, sort of, Akshay, because my aunt was involved, my mom was involved, my dad was involved. Everyone had a little bit of role to play. Only after a certain period in time did the actual realization happen that there is a scalability in the sense of model that was there, right? Honestly, at the beginning, there was no such intent, nor appetite, nor even understanding of what is possible, right? So that's how the journey started, honestly.
And like you were part of the first hospital being set up or the clinic. What is the difference between clinic, hospital? What would Cloud9 be classified as?
We would be a full-fledged hospital, like anything that a mother would require throughout her journey of pregnancy, from the time that they've realized that they're going on the family way, to managing them for the 9 months of the pregnancy, helping them deliver the baby, and up to 2 years of the baby's age is what Cloud9 really thrives upon. In the recent past, we've also added fertility to the forte, wherein couples who kind of find it hard to conceive naturally can reach out to our experts and also try and look at techniques which are then available to help them conceive, right? So it starts from fertility, pregnancy management, the actual delivery, and 0 to 2 years of the baby's age, right? We are also dabbling into a little bit of pediatrics as well, but we'll get there over a period of time. But it is this, the 1,000-day program, as we call it, is what our entire focus is upon. So we're a full-fledged hospital. We don't like to call it as that, but for technicality purposes, yes, we are a full-fledged hospital.
What do you like to call it then?
We just like to call it as Cloud9, right? So this is just a place where people need to be less anxious about everything and, not be burdened by what they actually know about healthcare in general, right? That this is not sick care, right? This is not illness, this is wellness. And it took us a lot of years, a lot of time, a lot of goodwill, a lot of sort of encouragement from the parents themselves to be able to kind of give this the dimension that it really needed. That you don't really need to be part of another hospital to actually go through your pregnancy journey, right? So for us, it was just single-minded focus, call it obsession, to kind of, say that this is how it needs to be. But over a period of time, this kind of set itself into a different sector where we were able to kind of do what we're doing and then be able to establish that anywhere across the country today, if anyone's looking to have their pregnancy journey managed, even if it's not with Cloud9, they would still seek out a single specialty like us to get the best of that life journey, right? So I think we are hugely proud of the fact that we created this sort of a revolution that everyone now looks forward to this really good lifestyle, life stage that they can celebrate.
So, a lot of doctors are uh, also, like, in a way, entrepreneurs, in the sense that they have their own practice, which ranges from either a small clinic or single specialty hospital. And in fact, I grew up in South Delhi. We had a like a very premium kind of a single specialty, similar to Cloud9 kind of a hospital, very near my home. But uh, what makes it go beyond that one single hospital into a pan India chain, which Cloud9 is today? What are those ingredients which go into it? Is it about ambition of the founding team? Is it about process orientation? What are those things which really make it go beyond just one single family run kind of a chain, which I assume is how you also started?
Yeah, we were, like I said, we were never a chain, Akshay. And yeah, we were just a single sort of solitary unit. We started in 2006. The second one happened only in like 2012, right? Between 11 and 12. So like 5, 6 years, good 5, 6 years, even before we could think of anything. And honestly, this is like what, 12, 13 years back. And if you had asked me then also, I wouldn't have imagine that, we could, I mean, yes, if you ask me what's the ambition, I'll give you the number of centers, but today we're like 42 locations across 16 cities and continuing to grow. We have line of sight for 50 centers within the grasp of next couple of years. It's just crazy in terms of the spread that has been possible. Um, I think, look, the clear sort of difference was, I think, the ambition of the founders. You're right. I think one of the things was to kind of came back to us to say that, do we really want to do this, right? Because look, the first unit that we had was wildly successful, Akshay, and that's what a lot of doctor entrepreneurs, like you mentioned, take a lot of pride in, that it's their center and, it's bustling at its seams, and that is what success means for a lot of them. I think it was just opportunity, like I said, right place, right time. I think we had a significant first movers advantage in terms of, like I said, goodwill, capital being available, for us to kind of just not lose focus and only do this, despite not being one of the looked up, sought after healthcare specialties, right? So I think it was a combination of some of these things which kind of got us onto the treadmill. But once you got onto the treadmill, I think it was about just being able to go deeper and unlock more value, right? Like I think today we would have the most number of insights in terms of anything that has to do with pregnancy across the world, in fact, simply because of the volumes we manage, be it intervention of clinical outcomes, be it intervention of prognosis, be it use of technology, be it being able to attract global talent to come back and practice in the country, to the number of complicated cases that we've actually kind of seen and managed, right? It's just overwhelming. But the beauty is that we stuck to this as the specialty and just went on deeper and deeper. And we just feel that we're still on the tip of the iceberg, right? I think there is so much to be done. But the beauty was to say that we did not lose our focus and suddenly said that, you know what, this worked well. Why don't we go to orthopedics or a nephrology or a neurology and such, right? Believe me, those digressions did happen in terms of at least conversations to say that can we do more? But I think it was the actual dawning of the realization to say that there's value in verticalized healthcare, especially in this, right? And that's what really helped. And I think, look, you cannot deny the fact, Akshay, and this is true for most brick and mortar businesses, that the network effect really works, right? So if you are able to kind of go in with a very cluster-based approach, go into a specific city, go into a specific region, and you're able to kind of build a network of assets across both clinical competency, infrastructure, customer goodwill, you will continue to grow faster and stronger. Right? And that's really what has worked for us as well.
Okay, okay. I'll zoom in on some of these things. But tell me that story of you are running one single wildly profitable hospital. So what happens which then makes you go on to second and then from second to 42? Like what was actually going on behind the scenes inside the boardroom discussions, and what were the
Well,
challenges that you faced? And
honestly, we'll need to have a separate one day session for that, Akshay, to see what all happened. But let me try and sum it all up. I think, look, two things happened, right? I think one is it is the combination of founders, right? I don't know if each one of us in isolation could have really even attempted to achieve what we did. I think for me at least, the realization happened when I went to B school. I am Bangalore, where you're just exposed to so much more larger thinking, right? You see a lot of numbers, you do a lot of stargazing. Uh, you kind of hear from others who are your peers in the journey to also kind of understand what their vision and dreams are also, right? And I specialize in entrepreneurship, diploma in entrepreneurship, and you kind of meet a lot of people who have already done some of these things, trying to do certain things, and you kind of see that, hey, a lot of the metrics that we are also vying for, or you see it from a theoretical point of view, we already have it. What does it mean to kind of scale up, right? So I think it required one of us to become uncomfortable with what we had already and try and do something more, right? It also meant taking everybody else along to also say that, hey, what does this journey mean, right? And it's not like any one of us had seen what it means, right? Like none of us understood. And this was, I raised first capital in 2011. And if you can think back to 2011, Akshay, Flipkart had announced its first institutional round around that time. So I'm talking of nascency of venture as a sector in India, right? Forget venture investing and so on. Venture as a sector was still finding its foot in the country. So, forget about what does it mean from a shareholding point of view, inviting professionals onto the board. What does it mean to raise capital? All of this was new, right? Today, you will find 40 odd founders talking about this every single day because there's so much that has happened in the country. But at that time, you have to kind of figure out a lot of these things on your own, right? So I think it was a little bit of rub of the green going our way as well, that we found the right partners found us, and we were able to kind of deliver on the vision that we all had. And we had our fair share of mistakes. We learned through it. The version of Cloud9 that you see today is far different to what we started with. There's a lot of things which have changed during this, whatever, 17, 18-year journey, right? So what it kind of undertakes is how founders evolve, right? How all of us evolve. How today, for example, when you and I are having this chat, I introduce myself as managing partner at PeerCapital. Cloud9 continues to grow and thrive, but it's being helmed by an amazing leadership of professional managerial folks, right? Like from my CEO to the entire CXO team.
It's no
Uh,
longer family run.
it's no longer family run, right? So how do you even transition this? And more than just paper, it's a lot to do with mindset, Akshay. And this, believe me, is not as well done in our country as it is in most others, right? People
Mm.
don't understand it, like, understand it as well or appreciate it as well. I think this has to change, right? And the sooner you can get to a level where you can actually make yourself redundant, I think that's when you start building an institution, right? So that's what happens. So I think I'm just, super proud of the fact that we've actually been able to do a lot of these things. I'm 44 now, and I transitioned my role from managing director in 2020. So it's been about good 4 or 5 years. So, right around the time that I turned 40 is when, there was already a team of professionals who were trying to do what they were doing. We were aiming to take the company public. So, it's just been a grand journey for me over the last decade and a half to actually bring in this entire multiple facets of experience from raising capital, building a strong team, creating the sector, putting that proposition out, making the company public ready. So it's just been tremendous for me individually. Right? So the idea now is to try and see how to transition a lot of this learning into other founders so they don't have to go through a decade and a half as a journey to get there, right? So that's what it's been. I know it's a long answer to your question, but I think the important aspect was the, the resilience and the adaptability of the founding team to actually grow with good times, right? I think that's what was important.
You said that someone in the founding team had to get uncomfortable with what seemed like a good situation. Who was that who got uncomfortable?
It was largely me. It was me who first got uncomfortable and made everyone else uncomfortable.
How did you do that?
Well, I think it was also about realization. Yeah. I think once we kind of figured out that, the external capital is essential for trying to get onto a growth path of any nature, right? So even when we raised the first round of capital, this was from Matrix or now called Z47. Um, Again, it is for that period in time, right? So that came as a catalyst to say that, okay, listen, you guys have one center. Why don't you try and take this to 4 or 5 different centers, right? So it actually started with something like that, but the actual nuance of what it means, like, having a board meeting, there is someone who occupies a significant trench on the cap table. What does it mean from a decision making point of view? These are things you don't really know or understand, right? And this you have to go through as a journey. And like I said, again, today there are enough anecdotal evidences, but for me, it was also to one, realize that, hey, these are the changes which will happen. And second was to try and take as many people along also on this, right? And some were up for the game and some weren't. And, it had its own sort of outcome in the end. But the fact is, I think there was alignment to say that, we need to do this together, right? And that's what it took. So for me, I think one, just how do you kind of turn decision making into a process oriented decision making rather than I like versus he likes or versus she likes, right? How do you kind of translate that to a proper process making so that it's there even without you individually being there, right? And this particular thing, Akshay, took the longest time in my mind, right? To be able to kind of give this sort of decision making, and there were several fallouts, honestly, on some of the decisions not being taken well enough or the execution not being up to the mark. But you live with some of these, right? And that's where you grow, right? If it is all to do on your own, I don't think you really grow as much. You need to surround yourself with people who are much smarter than you, and that's when you will actually start growing. If you are surrounding yourself with people who are just, yes sir, three bags full, then nothing but a nursery rhyme, right? So
Yeah.
that's what you
W-
become,
w-
right?
what were some of those fallouts? Like, how did you navigate that change management from family run to professionally run? Like,
So I mean, it's a touchy topic, actually, but one was, I think it was also about one is time. People kind of take their own time. I don't think it comes with a certain threshold of understanding to say that if these three things happen, then I'm good, or if some of these happen over a period of time, I'm good, right? Each person has their own sort of avenue to understanding and appreciating. It's an equal responsibility on the professional who's also coming on board to kind of do this, right? To kind of navigate with the promoter, the founder group, to actually help go through this journey, right? So I think it was this transitionary time which was different for different people. So there was there was a fair amount of I don't know what's the right word, that there was a fair amount of misunderstanding, I would say. I don't know if misunderstanding is really the word, but to say that now that there's a professional in the middle, how do you kind of navigate decision making, right? Like, a lot of those things took time. For me, given that I was the instigator for a lot of these things, I think I had to become suddenly okay with a lot of these things, right? I had no time to learn, unlearn, or try and go with the flow. I had to immediately kind of jump and do some of these things right away, right? But look, ultimately, Akshay, we are in a healthcare, we're in healthcare, right? It is not as cut and dry as most other businesses where you can do certain things without thinking what's the health outcome of something like this, right? So it's
you
again,
can't do fail fast.
you can't, right? You can't do exactly. So you can't, at least not in all the things, right? You can't do that. So this again was a little bit of realization that it happens over a period of time, that amount of professionalizing, amount of things that are happening. And look, let's be honest, this is also a field which I think has drastically changed, but at the time that we were growing was severely starved of good talent, right? There were ones who had grown their companies, doctor entrepreneurs who, the household names that we know already. But between them and the rest of it, there was huge gap, right? On people, like you actually asked about, why aren't people scaling like how you guys have scaled, right? So I think there was a huge talent gap also in terms of being able to come in and nourish that ambition and be able to kind of provide that sort of blitz scaling, right? So I think the onus was on us to also be able to go and look at other industries and bring people from there, which meant more amount of time and energy gone into kind of getting them comfortable with what is the vision here, right? It worked out. I mean, we had some who didn't work out, but the ones who worked out, they've all been here for a great part of their lives, and have continued to do well, right? So it's been a journey of sorts for sure, man.
Okay. I want to understand the business of a hospital better. What are typically the revenue heads for a hospital? What are the kind of metrics which you track? So say for example, if it's a SaaS business, you will say what is the ACV, what is the ARR, or stuff like that. In a hospital business, what are those key metrics which hospital founders, investors typically track and that matter?
So, look, it's again different. If it's multi-specialty, then there are a lot of metrics which are from a public point of view, looked at what is good, I can tell you about how some of our things work and what are critical for us, right? So one is, I think we are, whatever said and done, are still a capital intensive business. We like to call ourselves asset light, but in the sense we don't own any of our assets directly. It's all leasehold. So it is that much more capital efficient. But I think the reason I talk about capex is because there is one metric again which is very important is ROCE, right? Return on capital employed. It has to be a very, very this is something most people don't even understand and appreciate as to why this is important. It's about the turnover of capital in terms of, how much revenue, what is the recovery of the capital that you've invested in, how fast can you recover, right? And that is in itself a very big parameter. This is Rossi is something which is very pertinent to brick and mortar businesses, also true for hospitals. And in our case, I think the metric that we look for is look, we are a very customer obsessed sort of organization, right? The health part comes after, but we exist simply because our obsession is with the customer. So anything that you would do from what is customer obsession, we will have those metrics. Like if it is NPS, right? NPS on a promoter detractor score, we would track this diligently. We would, it's part of our reviews, it's part of everything that we do. All our decision making is on the basis of this. We do have wallet share on what is our wallet share because we operate in a finite window of one's lifetime journey. We actually know what are all the various touch points which happens during this journey. What is our wallet share of that, right? Like how much of an influence do we have? How much of it do we fulfill ourselves? How much do we do as surrogate fulfillment? What do we do during this period? It's very important again. The yield, which is also a similar sort of metric in terms of saying that if someone's been with us for 9 months, or we break it down into weeks and days, we then kind of understand what's the realization for someone who goes through the entire 9 month journey with us to the ones who actually end up delivering with us, to the ones who actually end up with the 2 years of the baby's care. So we kind of do a lot of this to say what's the yield that we actually kind of manage, right? And we go deeper on this.
Yield means like the LTV, the long term value of the customer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. Lifetime value. So yes, it is that to say that, given that you will only be able to influence over this period of time, what are all those different sort of things which is I said it's in correlation with wallet share. So this is something we actively look upon. There's combination of insurance versus cash paying versus someone coming to you the minute they realize they're pregnant to someone coming to you only at the time of delivery. All of this goes into the case mix of, how do we kind of improve from where we are, right? So wallet share and yield is LTV, all goes together. We're very fussed about our conversion metrics in terms of, someone coming and saying a hello to us, understanding what is our services, what is our service offering, to do they really come into the journey with us, and how much of it is managed completely by us, how many of them, like I said, if they're coming in from the first trimester, do they go on and continue and deliver with us, or for various reasons that drop off during different periods of time? What is our conversion metric? How good are we on this, right? So we do this fairly diligently, and there's an active group who will always sit and figure out some of these things. Of course, helped with a lot of invisible tech, which is kind of doing this time and time again for us repeatedly, which kind of helps us stay on top of data. But these are some of the metrics on top of my mind, Akshay. Of course, look, the usual unit level economics has to be sacrosanct, from your revenue to your gross margin to your fixed cost and your EBITDA, both at the unit level and the consolidated at a group level. How are things changing? If there is a significant line item which is coming in on fixed cost, what do you kind of do to then deactivate it, or how do you kind of do something to kind of mitigate that growing faster, right? Like one thing in our sort of line of share would be, most people don't realize that in a center there is a fixed outcome prospect, right? Like if we have the throughput to deliver, let's say 120 babies a month, You cannot suddenly say, I will deliver 200 a month. It will only be 120 at max, right? Without letting any of these other customer obsessed metrics to fail, right? So we have these as our limitation. So for 120, year on year, if you're, let's say, at 100, right? Year on year, you cannot keep increasing the cost of service because there is some amount of restriction like insurance pricing, what are customers willing to pay. But you will know that the cost will continue to raise, right? So rise. So what it means is while your revenues can actually grow like this, your costs will actually grow like this. So how do you keep this gap consistent and active in terms of your EBITDA intact is the most critical aspect, right? A lot of people again don't understand this with brick and mortar. So again, this requires a lot of activation, a lot of sort of vigilance in terms of being able to look at what those metrics are. How do you unlock value every time, right? And that is what is important. So even to realize, for example, we have now 13 centers in Bangalore. There was a time when we had set up three, and I had said we are done with Bangalore. We've covered everything, and we have 13 today, right? Which meant some of them actually, cannibalized the existing units. And why was that important? What is the overlap? How much of new business will you acquire as against, cannibalizing some of the existing business? So these are things that we continue to kind of simulate and understand and look at, uh, where the units need to continue to, thrive and survive, right? So these are, again, as brick and mortar, a lot of these things become very restrictive. But if you understand how these things work, I think it can be a great business to run.
Okay. Can you break down at one unit what is the various revenue heads? Yeah, if let's say a hospital earns 100 crores in a month, or I don't know what would be a good number as an example, what would be the
Yeah,
sources of
so
revenue and what would be the cost heads? What would be the margin profile?
again, look, it's different for different specialties, Akshay. I think it's different for multi-specialties where a lot of multi-specialties, the single fixed cost item in this is the cost of land and asset, where the land in itself would be subsidized given that, they would have got something from the government to so on and all of that. So the fixed cost, the single biggest fixed cost item for most of these large hospitals will actually be toned down. Today, a lot of them are also happy paying good rentals for good assets where people are happy to kind of put them up long-term leaseholds, and they're able to kind of not have to spend a lot of capex in terms of acquiring land and then building from there, right? So that is one major fixed cost item. Second biggest item is the manpower. I will finish cost first and then get to revenue. Second biggest line item is the manpower, right? Not taking the doctor cost into play. A lot of us also like to keep it above gross margin in terms of cost of goods sold, in a manufacturing parlance, to say cost of service provided, to say that some of the doctor cost actually comes up there. But there is still a strong support group from all your teams on the floor, right? From the paramedics to the customer relation folks, to your maintenance, to your security, to your even your duty doctors, to all of them who kind of keep the clock ticking, right? So this is the single largest, again, cost item which comes into the P&L of a specific hospital unit. Third is obviously the utilities, huge power costs, huge sort of maintenance costs, which again, even if the hospital is not fully functioning or is just half utilized at capacity, you still have a very high fixed cost of utilities and such, because a lot of these things need to run even if the occupancy is low. For example, the OTs and the ICUs need to kind of have a certain threshold in terms of what's the infection control, what's the sort of micron factor in terms of the air quality. All of these need to be there, whether it's fully occupied or if there's just one bed occupied, right? So a lot of these items, again, in terms of utilities, are fairly high. Um, in terms of revenues, look, there are two ways to split it. One is obviously the OPD, which is your foot in the door. Uh, if purely for OPD, if you look at it, it's not a great margin contributor, because a lot of the margin here on the OPD fees goes into the doctor's share of fees. and there's a very little percentage. So it's a 80-20 split in most cases. The 80% goes to the professional, the 20% goes to the enabler or the provider in this case. And this 20%, you have to treat it more as a foot in the door, right? And why is it foot in the door? Because there is then the whole function of diagnostics, imaging, pharma, and all the other ancillary services which come in, which is typically like largely the provider's sort of wallet share. So in most cases, it's 100%. In some cases, it's like an 80-20 in the reverse sort of metric, that the 80 goes to the hospital and 20 goes to the doctor. So it's different for different cases, right? But OPD is a fairly simpler construct to kind of understand. IPD is, of course, very different. It depends on the sort of specialty that you're going deeper into. If it's group practice with a number of doctors who kind of cover 24 hours across all of these things, for example, at anesthesia, which is required as a cover across 24 hours, does it come as group practice, or you're hiring your own set of doctors? To doctors being on retainers versus doctor being on fee for service, where they come in, actively manage a case, and for that particular case, they actually get their share of what is the procedure fees, right? So it's a combination of some of these things, but IPD is where you typically have larger revenue pools, right? So a hospital in general only makes money when there is a procedure being performed, right? It is not for getting someone to stay in the hospital for longer. In fact, the longer someone stays, the more, the less money they make off that individual. Unlike most people who say that, they want to keep us in the hospital for long, no one really wants to keep anyone for long. They want to be able to enable more procedures and then be able to do a very quick turnaround for them to recover and go back home, right? So procedures is where the real revenue kicker is, right? And again, like I said, for different hospitals, with different contexts. If it is fee for service, then there is a certain percentage share agreed with with the physician, with the doctor or the set of doctors, and what the hospital kind of makes. When doctors are on retainers or basically employed, then obviously everything goes to the hospital, and then the doctor cost then comes down the line item, where you're able to then use it as part of the manpower cost, right? So it's a little bit of this, right? In a nutshell, this is how it would be, Akshay. I don't know if you had anything specific to ask, but this is largely.
Why is doctor compensation so complicated? Is it that doctors have more negotiating power? Like if I was hiring engineers, I would know, okay, someone with 5 years experience is this cost, 10 years experience is this cost. But with doctors, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like there are multiple models. You can either have revenue share or pay for every procedure that they perform, or a retainer, which is then like a salary model. So why does it work like that? Why does this
No, it's
industry
not.
work?
It's not complicated actually. It's actually, with years of experience, you actually lean a lot more towards fee for service, where it is the single doctor practitioner who's actually backing themselves to say that, listen, this is my caseload, and I'm good for it, right? So um, typically, you will see that the more experienced ones are more in tune with the fee for service. It's as you keep growing from being a resident doctor to be able to have your own practice and grow through the ranks on some of these things, where the retainer kind of starts and then weans off towards fee for service. It's actually not very complicated. It gets complicated where doctors bring their entire support teams. If they bring their junior doctors, if they bring their nursing teams, if they bring their recovery teams, it kind of gets a bit complicated in terms of managing. I can tell you, I haven't seen too many hospitals being able to grow with that sort of a mentality or a mindset. But you would see single sort of centers being, thriving on that sort of a practice, right? But it's very difficult to scale. Also, there aren't too many of such physicians who can actually kind of, bring that sort of, group practice, as they say, right? But it's actually not that complicated, Akshay. I think it's just perceived to be complicated. And if you want to make it complicated, you can. I think people have, like I said, come up with very different incentive structures that for everything you do, here's what I would get, here's what you would get. Those are not scalable, Akshay. These are again very far and few in between. you would hear of some corner case stories of this doctor having a cut in everything that they say and everything that they do and all of that, right? Look, those are not scalable. Do they happen? Yes, they happen. But do they happen in organizations where you scale and become largely more process oriented? You cannot sustain some of those practices. So the good ones keep this very clean, simple. It is just caseload. If you're able to manage your caseload well, if you're in a fee for service, that's really what you kind of get, right? And I think for most hospitals to also think big, I think the transparency and the visibility of some of these line items is the most crucial. This is not something you discover over a period of time to say, how will I manage? Because this is there, you can't like get a physician to a certain level and then say, why don't we taper off from here? It's not going to happen. It's about how do you take them through this journey and sustain at this journey together, right? I think that is what is important. So it's not something you discover later. So this is something someone has to actively kind of track. And look, in our case, it's far more simpler because there are only so many specialties that we manage. But in the case of multi-specialty, it becomes a lot more complicated. It goes into a different dimension of politics, Akshay, where OT time on the criticality of who gets the best OT time slots to, the recovery to, the best recovery wards to all of that, right? There's a lot of that managing also which happens. So I am not envious of people who run multi-specialty hospitals or who run multi-specialty hospitals because it's really, really complicated.
Hmm. What is a hospital's edge? Is it people, processes, infrastructure, machinery, marketing?
I don't think marketing has anything to do with it. Marketing can just be for just the initial set where you are able to kind of get people acquainted with it, but I don't think it's marketing. And even if it's marketing, I'd be surprised. A lot of people don't even market themselves well. But it's actually, I think in today's day and age, it's actually infra. It is actually a lot to do with people management. I think clinicians and healthcare providers together who kind of again do a lot of customer obsession will always continue to do well than the ones who just have this huge gap between the credence of what the clinician has to say to what the patient in this case has to follow, right? And look, it's different for different people. I wouldn't say that it works across every sort of customer persona. People have to figure out who is the right customer. Like you cannot have a very fancy infra and say that I will also do like any social schemes that are available as well, right? You have to be very clear what is it that you're building for, and there is great avenue to actually build something with social welfare schemes, right? But you have to be very clear that's what you're building for, right? Your cost structures have to be like that. Your care protocols have to be like that. Your entire service offering has to revolve around that. You cannot say I will do a mixed bag of some of these things, and that's where I think people falter. So identifying what is it that you are there and who's the customer persona that you're solving for, I think is the most crucial. And in today's day and age, Akshay, again, from the large demand and supply gap that we have in our country, right? Like you would see huge oversupply of hospitals, clinicians, specialities in urban context like Bangalore. There is no way you can't find a good specialist. At least you'll find three or four good specialists for every single sort of healthcare specialty that you need multiple times over, right? So, but you go even like 40, 50 kilometers outside of Bangalore and you will find that to find a good physician itself is a problem, right? So you have that sort of density where it's largely concentrated in urban sort of settings. So how does one differentiate, right? It's about being able to actually stand for something, right? And demonstrate that clearly. I've seen, so the same sort of context applies to hotels. Like why is the Taj Group different from an Oberoi to a Marriott to anyone else, right? Or a Ritz, right? It's about how they kind of train the people. I'll give you an example as well, right? And this is something which stuck to our mind. And one of the things we did, Akshay, was because we were trying to do something very different, we always looked at very different parallel industries to say that is there learnings that we can do. So I actually did a lot of aping from what airlines used to do. At that time, Indigo used to be on the hot seat for everything. They used to do changes like this, and it was so amazing to see, right? I mean, it's a far cry from who they are today, but it was just amazing to see. It's the same with hotels, right? Like how they kind of go about this single-mindedly. So, for example, I won't name the hotels, but in one hotel, you go and ask for, can I use the washroom? And someone would say, yes, sir, it's down the corridor and on the right, right? Another hotel you would go to and say, can I use the washroom? They'll say, why don't I take you there, right? So it's very different, and this is what happens. And if you've been to hotels of this nature, you'll actually know, and you can kind of start resonating to it. So I think it's about identifying who's your persona, right? So if you know that the customer values some of these aspects, that is what you would do, right? Because end of the day, it is human cost. How do you kind of do the ROI on some of these things to say that can one person just be directing to one person actually accompanying? It's a very different, time value of money, right? So how do you kind of make some of these things work is very important. And I think we don't do enough of, especially in healthcare in our country, I don't think we do enough of patient management, right? I think from expectation setting to even helping them understand, traverse through the journey. And this is what I was telling you about demand supply gap, that even in urban settings, there is so much of demand for good services, good clinicians, that sometimes they also kind of forget that they need to take someone through the journey, right? And I've seen this well within my family itself, and you and I discussed a while ago, that some of these things you just see it as being very absent, right? But you see Western sort of systems, for good or for bad, they kind of make you part of the journey, and you don't have that here, right? So it is still improved from maybe a decade ago, but I think it really requires that change where you kind of know that you're in good hands, where you trust them blindfolded, right? Today, that is unfortunately not there, right? It's a combination of things. It's from the provider, it's from the physician, it's from the customer themselves on having wrong sort of expectations. But I think that is something we should really, really thrive for, to be able to do something more, man. I don't know. I have a feeling that technology will kind of aid some of that, disruption, that, this opacity that we work with in healthcare, especially in our country, that needs to go away a little bit, right? Because the system thrives on this opacity, that I know more than you, and hence you will be subservient to me, right? So that somehow needs to kind of go. I may be alone thinking in this direction. I've seen this first hand, up close and personal. It is something we at least hope, and we know that we are doing a lot at Cloud9 to kind of change. But even otherwise, outside of Cloud9, I just wish that we can be a lot better at this, right? So
How do you make doctors care? Because I mean, two hospitals with equally good infrastructure, you will receive a different vibe. You know, s- and so how do you actually build that into the organization DNA that people
no,
care?
it's a very tough thing, Akshay. It's again, I'm not trying to say that the physicians are the bad person in this context, right? I think there has to be a certain amount of uh, understanding towards what goes on in the life of a physician, right? That if they are too open, then customers take them, or I'm using the word customers, but patients take them for granted and call them at will, and that's also not right. So, which is why I think there is a certain amount of guarding which happens in terms of how a clinician kind of interacts with the patient, right? So, I think making everyone part of the larger vision, I think, is very important, right? Look, it's very different. Like in chronic conditions where you know that this individual, either through a lifestyle disease or genetically inborn, has to live with this sort of disorder for the rest of their lives, be it diabetes or anything else, right? So I think there the care protocol is very different in terms, what do you do? Emergencies, how do you kind of manage? I think active communication itself is largely missing, right? And I think this is what most people need to kind of try and embellish upon. I would kind of vote for hospitals who would say that, listen, if we are able to stereotype a lot of what we do into processes and policies, outside of what the doctor has to say, can we support that with excessive information and push that to the customer? I think that is what is important, and not enough is done in this, right? I think somehow people are averse to technology in this, and I'm not talking of AI coming in and dictating notes on doctors. I'm not talking of all of that. I'm just saying simple WhatsApp push to say that, hey, you are prepping for a surgery. Here are 10 things you should know, right? And this is something which is repeated time and time again. What is medicine, right? The doctor is not incentivized to think on their feet and suddenly innovate, right? In fact, a good doctor of ours told us that, listen, there's only one thing which is drilled into your head when you're studying medicine is this is what you need to do. This is the book. You play by the book. You cannot deviate from the book, right? Very few people deviate and do something about it, but the larger good 99% has to follow the book, right? And it's through that you discover more things that are possible and capable of doing. But I think when you are working in this silo to say that this is exactly what I'm doing, this is the process I'm following, procedure I'm following, I just feel the technology can actually add a lot of value to it, right? So I think the hospital of tomorrow will actually be something which will actively communicate. And to your question of what makes one hospital better than the other is when they look at this as a system and not just look at saying that I'm providing this service. Do you have cardiac care? Yes, I have cardiac care. But do you have cardiac care for someone who's a nephro patient with let's say chronic diabetes to whatever else, right? How do you look at that individual holistically and say that what can one care program do across all the requirements of the patient? Right? You don't have some of those. I think technology can solve for a lot of it, but it's going to take time.
Okay. Uh, so a lot of things that you told me in terms of the kind of metrics you track. How did you tool the organization to collect so much data? Because I don't think a lot of traditional hospitals are able to track metrics like, say, NPS score even effectively, compared to the number of things you told me that you're tracking. So is it that your own background from the ERP space kind of helped
Yeah,
you
yeah,
to
yeah, no,
build an
absolutely. I
org
think,
like that, or?
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that engineer in me, had to kind of be obsessed about being able to put some of this data into play from the very beginning. So we have, not as much insights, but we have insights from the very first baby that was born in our system way back in 2006. So, over a period of time, that's only gotten better with different sort of tools and products and services that you can use. But this is something that we've been very obsessed with. So we've actually created our own sort of tech stack in terms of what is our system of records, where all the sort of core data sits, and you kind of use that for all your mining. And you have a system of engagement or which is like a more like a data lake where you are able to not just create new services, new sort of avenues of engagement for the customer, but also work with others. If someone else is doing a great job of it, can you actually get them to come and come in and actually use that entire interface that we've created at a very fast switch rate, right? So as an example, I think about a year and a half back, the CRM we were using, and I can't name them, was a very good CRM, but a global major came in and showcased a lot of things for us. And I think we were at maybe about 30 odd centers at that time, and the switchover happened overnight. You won't believe, with zero disruption, right? So that's the sort of thing. And so we don't get valued for our technology because it's largely inward facing, right? It's largely for what we do. For example, the app that we employ, it's not just an app, it's a complete interface for what happens in the system. So if our app were to go down, which means our systems go down. But most hospital, if you ask them, do you have an app? It's a tick in the box saying, yes, we have an app, but it means nothing for the system, right? So for us, it's a lot to do with how we've evolved over a period of time from collecting simple data, which was more um, one way, I would say, where we would collect that data because that we would want, to actually becoming a very two-way sort of system over a period of time, because this interactiveness actually improved over a period of time, right? So, and we built at an age where internet was still a fad, man. And today we're talking of AI hype cycle. We've lived through the internet hype cycle, right? So where internet was a fad. I had my first job when internet was considered a fad, right? So you just know that some of these things, as they kind of come in and they hit that productivity plateau, you know that some of these things are here to stay. right? And like I said, it's also understanding the customer persona, Akshay. I think a lot of people don't value this enough. For us, the kind of customers that we are talking of at Cloud9, it is a high engagement period. The 0 to 9 months, there is equal willingness on the customer side to actually be able to ask for information, seek information, digest that information, and reciprocate, right? So, for us, as much as we can kind of give in to some of those sort of, high engagement interactions, we learn a lot, right? But in most other cases, you may not have some of these things, right? And which is why this identification becomes critical, and which is why you go in and check for NPS to say that have we done enough or not, right? So we're super vigilant on that. By the way, our NPS scores are like ridiculously high. We've stopped telling people about it because on par with even the best of everything from an Apple to all that. We do like global comparison. We do the similar thing with Great Place to Work. I was recently updated that now we actually stand a chance with the big boys who have like big budgets across all of the things that they do, from free lunches to everything to why they're a great place to work. We're actually in that league today, right? To say how can the healthcare a healthcare company with brick and mortar services actually compete with something like that, right? So it's about just being able to align and run a very transparent organization, right? So these things make us stick, yeah. So very obsessed with technology, and we continue to kind of overdo on some of these things.
Give me some examples of how data helps. Like, does it help you to change patient outcomes? Like, are you able to decide a better course of treatment because you see one
No,
treatment?
so on the
Or-
clinical side, look, it's largely more as a more as a support sort of mechanism. It is not to kind of help you on clinical pathways. It is more in terms of support of being able to capture all the right information. It's more on the prognosis side, building up of the the patient case in this particular aspect than finding new pathways. We are not that, right? But on the clinical context, it's about just being able to identify a lot of these things. And given that there is a 9 month window during which you actually look at the progression of pregnancy where between the mother and the child growing inside the womb, outcomes of that is something what you kind of relate into. So, for example, in NICU, we actually do a lot of experimentation. We just put out our first paper on AI, and how we are using AI to better clinical outcomes. Right, we're the first ones in the country to do it. We use a lot of our data. For example, there is a particular network called Vermont Oxford Network, or VON for short, which basically is the certifying agency for everything that hospitals in the US and Europe kind of put out to say that, listen, this is our infection rate, this is our mortality rate, this is our outcome to this and all of that, right? They are like your auditor, an
Hmm.
independent assessor who would come and validate. We are the only organization in the country who's part of one. No Apollo, no Fortis. I mean, please don't quote me on this, but for whatever reason, they're not part of it. We're the only ones who's part of it, right? To say that, listen, whatever we put out there, there's someone who's validating a lot of these things and say, yes, they are better than what most others are even claiming to be, right? So this was just for us, right? It wasn't to say that, oh, you know what, we're on one, but it is just for us to say that we are doing some things different. So that is only possible when we are able to generate that sort of a data, right? So it's just today it is on the clinical side, it's largely to do with support and try and tread towards better research, better sort of publishing of outcomes, help find new pathways like neonatology, like I told you, which is Dr. Kishore's specialty and passion area. We would be like the number one in the world to actually be able to find new ways of doing certain things, right? So I think it's with that amount of pride that we actually kind of work with, which means we collect more information, we collect a lot of data, we look at what each intervention meant in terms of successful graduation for the baby in the NICU. So all of that goes into play. But during pregnancy in itself, there's really not much in terms of, what you need to do. There is, of course, the gestational diabetes, which has come in now. The incidences are only growing higher. But all of that is also management. It's a 9 month window. It's not a chronic sort of condition. It's a 9 month window on what you kind of do, right? And in most cases, it's typically a nice natural progression, right? So that way it is pretty clear. But in terms of everything else that we do, just in terms of the content we put out there, what do people want to hear more? What do people want to ask more about? where are we engaging a lot more about which trimester is the most engaging? What do they want? Like I said, if we have to talk about wallet share or lifetime value, where is it that we should actually intervene, right? Because if you learn of a certain post facto that, somebody wanted ABCD and they actually got it, there's no point. You have to actually be preempting a lot of those things, right? So we use data for a lot of these things. We're very interactive that way. There's a lot of sessions which happen, which are very interactive in nature, where people are able to kind of talk about what they want, and we actually use that and put it into our data sets. Anything we do from, ops management is very data bound
Mm.
on time utilized for certain things to revenue reconciliation to so many other things which happens that makes our teams more efficient, right? It's just crazy amount of tech that happens. And I think one thing is, again, something that I'm particularly proud of is we work with a lot of good product companies, startups, scale ups. We work with a lot of them because we just know that there are people who are doing good things far faster than what we can kind of be able to think of, right? So the good and bad is, like I said, our switching cost is next to nothing in terms of time. Which means if someone doesn't perform, we're happy to move on to the next one, and we have done that in fair few number of cases because we're single-minded towards our outcome more than anything. But for the ones who are kind of able to provide what we want and able to kind of grow, then you don't need a better growth partner than us at the speed at which we're growing, right? So that's how we use the tech.
Okay, so as in a large part of it is operational excellence and customer experience, like
Yep.
the use of the data. Understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, you spoke of changing decision making from an event to a process. What do you mean by that?
When did I say that? Change in which context did I say that?
When we were talking of the decision to go beyond being a family run business, you spoke of how you try to make decision making as a process instead of just you take a decision. Instead of that, there's a process to take a decision. So can you just zoom in on that a bit?
Yeah. So look, I think as fundamental as just choosing a location for your next unit, right? It starting from just anecdotal references to say that, I know Indranagar is a great place to uh, actually being able to bring that decision from a data bound kind of way in terms of looking at population density, looking at per capita income, looking at surrogate information in terms, how many sort of corporates are there, how many people are employed, what's the sort of dual income population there, how many number of houses are coming up, what's the sort of persona that people are, coming with, and all of that, right? So to the end version of that is, largely the next few locations of where Cloudnine is actually going to be is very data driven to that extent, as against saying that, I think Indranagar is a great area, right? So something as fundamental as that, two choice of specifications in the infra in terms of why is A a good material versus why is B a great material, to looking at now economies of scale across to say that, even if it's a great spec, can I bring it, because then I can amortize over number of units and bring that down to a scale. I mean, bring the price basis volume to even hiring sort of decisions on clinicians and so on, right? How much of it is referenceability? How much of it can you verify to um, personal interviews, to all of those things, rather than it being a single person deciding, it now actually goes to a team who actually then be able to certify, verify, reference, and be able to say that, why is he or she a good sort of partner to work with, right? So several of these things, Akshay, it's gone through a lot of process. We create a lot of playbooks, be it on infra, be it on customer process, be it on a lot of those things, and every playbook goes through its versions, right? So, and there's inputs welcome from the team on the ground to the managerial team to the board. Everyone gets involved to say that, how we need to be able to do kind of things, right? So that's how it's progressively kind of changed. We now have three independent directors on the board who actually have a very strong voice in terms, how they want to get themselves acquainted with what we do at Cloud9, and um, how we need to be looking at certain outcomes and so on, right? So it's a process altogether. So um, it's a good process, right? So for everyone, you now are with the realization that there is no single person who will actually take a decision and then be able to just run with it, right? You have to convince a bunch of others, because even if the decision is yours, the execution goes to a bunch of people in the team. If they are not sold on that, then there's no point in being able to kind of take the decision, right? Because you're not going to be able to do it yourself. So I think that collective sort of engagement and moving up has taken its own sort of time. So like I said, even from understanding why this wall needs to be pink to actually putting some science and thought behind it to see if it really needs to be pink or not, right? So it's been a massive process, man.
Fascinating. So you're saying as a founder, it is more important to set the process of decision making rather than take decisions yourself.
Yeah, you can be part of, weighing in on the decision, but I think it has to be in a way that there is certain degree of transparency of how the decision is taken, right? Because you, I mean, look, it's great, right? Like if everything goes well, then obviously you take all the credit. But if it goes bad, you also need to know that one, you take the blame for it, but how do you correct it? Right? I think that is what is most important. And if there is a good playbook being established on every single process that is being put out there, I think that's how companies grow. And time and again, actually, we've seen this with fantastic companies who've been able to do this, pass on the mantle. Most recent one being Freshworks, for example, such a big founder persona. First ones to list on Nasdaq, to so many things, and now handing over the reins to a professional CEO. And how do you kind of then manage the transition? So we've seen a lot of good companies, a lot of the public market benchmark companies. There aren't too many who are really the founder who's still running stuff, right? There you see a bunch of great, amazing professionals who are running the show there, right? So how do you kind of do these transitions? And for me, especially, I think again benefited with time, with sort of good counsel. A lot of things were changing in our country. Was deeply influenced by how GMR Group did what they did. It's well documented actually. PM Kumar was the guy who actually helped them set up this entire thing from, what will the family do? How will professionals come in? Our investors helped us a lot in terms of, for example, Sequoia had a session where Om Manchanda, who recently stepped down as the CEO of Lal Path Labs, was amongst the very first professionals to join a promoter-run company in healthcare. And it was a fantastic session where Om would come and talk to us as a professional to say that, how do you start working with promoters? What is it that you do? And we also had the likes of good organization like an Aegon Zender to Spencer Stewart, who would come and talk to you about saying, as promoters, how do you kind of then start working with professionals? Because it's not just tick in the box, right? You have to give them degrees of freedom to actually decide and take those sort of decisions on your behalf. It's a journey, but it kind of worked out well, and I think it's a framework of sorts, right? But most people who do this well, you will see that they can scale well. And idea should be to build an institution. I think that's what most founders need to kind of realize and rationalize, right? That yes, if you think you're indispensable, it's good and bad, right? Like I wouldn't say that most founder-run companies, like people ask about innovation at Apple today, right? Yes, one of the most valuable companies, but when's the real innovation that we've seen? When Steve Jobs was at it, you would see innovation at a very different level, right? Uh, so I think it's also about saying find your mix, right? To find your mix in terms of saying how progressive of a company are you, right? So for example, the way Zepto is run today, right? Which is like, everyone has their eyes on it, but these guys run the shop because I think not just being the enablers of the idea, but having to, be able to sustain this consistent growth and such, right? They have to be able to be there. And over a period of time, you will see that some of these things will kind of rationalize into others being able to manage that, right? But l- a lot of these other companies have been able to successfully transition. And I think that's where good founders will actually be able to transition, right? So again, it's not to say that everyone needs to transition, but I think working with a team of professionals actually be able to kind of take it to the next level.
Okay. You raised about 200 odd million at Cloudnine till date, as per traction.
Maybe more.
Okay, maybe more. Okay, okay. So, was it necessary to raise VC funds, or could you have scaled without, like, say, using debt or whatever? Or was VC funds an important ingredient of your success?
No, so for us, it was an absolute essential ingredient in the mix to be able to even think of scaling Akshay. It wasn't an avenue where debt would come and help us. If you remember, I also mentioned that we have something called asset light. The bad of an asset light is that you have nothing to collateralize, and
Ah, okay.
most of the debt
But
providers
the
will not
machinery would
be.
be on your books, right?
It's not much. It's not much,
Okay,
right? Like in
compared to
our
the
case, the
land.
machinery is a very small component of, what is our overall infra requirement. You would still have your working capital sort of avenues coming through banks and different sort of NBFC mix. But for us, look, you could also have waited for the business to have enough throughput for you to be able to then go and invest that as margin money and put something in and all of that. That was a sense of direction also that I honestly was attempting, but that will have its own sort of let's say scaling prospect, right? VC money gave us the avenue to be able to kind of scale faster, right? So I also again think that this was again time and place where good businesses could attract that sort of capital. We are not something which kind of blitzscales like technology, but we have done very good by some of our early investors who've come in and exited as well. So it's an absolute essential, was an absolute essential. We never had the capital ourselves, so everything that we had already gone into the first unit. So any possibility of scale wouldn't have happened without VC. And once you get onto that VC treadmill, if you are continuing to do good by showing good growth and consistent unit level economics, there is that certain amount of attraction towards more capital being able to come in there, right? And I think once we hit the capacities with which private equity works in, which is the next level of VC, that was another different dimension, right? So they have like very different timelines, very different sort of appetite towards what's the risk reward return. They only come into scaled companies, scaled in the sense, at least on processes and a lot of those things that there is no business risk, right? Yes,
Mm.
there is a scaling risk, there's an execution risk, but there is no inherent business risk, which is what VCs take. Once you get into the private equity part of things, then it's larger pools of capital. You are able to kind of do very different decision making. You kind of grow in different directions from there on once you hit a lot of stability. So for us, yeah, absolutely essential, Akshay.
Okay. Was it hard to raise funds? Was it easy? Does this sector attract VC money easily? What was your story to the funds?
Oh, it's actually only gotten worse from then.
Okay.
Holding myself guilty also in this to say that now that I'm a investor, brick and mortar doesn't cut it anymore. Simple brick and
Right.
mortar won't cut
Okay.
it anymore, right? So
Okay.
I was jokingly telling someone the other day to say that if I was starting Cloudnine or looking to raise capital for Cloudnine now, it would have been an even more difficult proposition to sell, right? So look, I think it wasn't easy back then. I think it wasn't easy simply because there wasn't much avenues of access, Akshay. It's not like how you and I are talking today, right? Like as I told you, 2010 is when I was looking to raise capital, and man, forget capital as an outcome. How do you even say hello to an Akshay, right? Like how do you even do this? It was non-existent. I remember putting in my LinkedIn profile in campus at IIMB in 2010 simply because a couple of my colleagues said that, that's the next big thing. I was like, okay, chalo, sab log kar rahe hai, to, that's how it was. So it was exceptionally hard to be able to even say hello to the right people. We didn't have the networks of today. There was no angel network. There was no counseling. There was no guidance. There was no sector specificity with what VC would come in and say, here are five healthcare investment work. No, right? It was just a lot of Hail Mary. So
Yeah.
it
How
took me
did
at
you crack
least,
Matrix? Yeah.
yeah, it took at least 2 years, 20 entire of 2010 and a good part of 2011. And it was so there were other options also. It was a good time, at least from capital being available, that I think we were able to kind of show that descript that there is real hunger to scale, and that there are scalable playbooks that we were trying to build, though we were just the one unit. Somebody still had to take a huge leap of faith on us. More than that, we were more than us being able to kind of take on ourselves. It needed an external person to be able to do that. So the conversation with Matrix then was actually led by Ashish Mohapatra, who's now the co-founder. I mean, who's the founder of Off Business and Oxyzo, right? He and Ruchi are the only husband and wife who have like two unicorns to themselves and running great businesses. Ashish was this great guy who actually saw what Cloud9 could be beyond, honestly, what me or Dr. Kishore could narrate, right? I think the ambition was there, but I think he was the only one who was able to kind of put that plan into perspective to say, what does it take to get there, right? And obviously, without the backing of Avnish, who's again, the founder of Matrix, now Z47, uh, that, that catalyst sort of push, was very essential, right? And I think it was, they're happy because, they got a tremendous exit from us, but I think it was a huge leap of faith that they took on us to be able to kind of get to where we are. So the first one was very tough, right? And a lot of no's, a lot of rejections each time. And again, look, there was nobody to kind of talk to. I was very, very lonely in this entire journey. So almost with like a fuss to be able to raise more capital to do this, I just made this as a life goal to say that, this needs to happen. But it was very lonely. Again, the advent of internet also at that time, there was literally nothing to go by and, find avenues or say that, ask ChatGPT like today to say that I got rejected for these reasons. What should I be doing better? You don't know. You only go through more conversations, right? But post the Matrix sort of, collaboration then opened up avenues for a lot more capital to kind of closely watch us. Our second investor was Sequoia in 2013, and they stayed engaged for at least 2 years from the time that Matrix invested in us to actively track, engage. They made me meet a lot of founders in their cohort to say, how they are helping them scale in whatever their ambitions are. A lot of those things happened, and despite running a fairly strong process, I was pretty clear that these are the ones that I'd like to build with, right? So 2013 was Sequoia where this happened, and I think a lot of then and today both of them are household names, right? Like Z47 and Sequoia. I think I was one of the very first companies to actually have the goodwill of both of such firms to actually be able to come in and help us scale. And it was fantastic. I think both brought very different perspectives of, how do you kind of look at the scaling journey. Avnish Ashish was very founder first and, more rationalizing towards backing founders and believing in what the founders can do, helping them with process and stuff. And Sequoia would also value that, but they would value a lot more on more process orientation. Ki jo man mein hai, how do you put it on paper? Like we've had series of workshops where, like I said again, for lack of better examples, why is that wall pink, right? So how do you put it into paper to say why is that pink? Why is this big? Why is it not lesser? Why is it not bigger? Where does each thing needs to be? Instead of saying Rohit likes it like this versus does it really make sense, right? So they were able to kind of translate a lot of first principles thinking into actual realization of saying, hey, is this good enough? Then started the whole private equity journey. True North happened in 2016, late 2015, 2016. And, they started talking about this term called EBITDA. And, that's when it dawned upon us to say that, acha, ye bhi hota hai. Thankfully, the business inherently had the capacity to generate EBITDA. But again, some of the things that you realize, Akshay, is, when you start focusing on a certain aspect, right? It's not like कि वो overnight वो change हो जाएगा, right? It takes time, it takes process. The decision you take today has a ripple effect over a period of time. So how do you kind of rationalize over all of those things? It's a lot of different perspectives that some of these guys brought in, right? So over a period of time to that to then TPG Temasek, TPG NewQuest, which came into the cap table. How are they thinking about what is the growth prospect? To now Temasek on our cap table, where Temasek is for, go for glory, right? So do more, get more, because for them the capital is abundant, so they want to be able to kind of push you towards, doing a lot more of what is possible, right? Not to say that, you break everything that you have, but to say that, think that if there is a way for capital to solve some of these growth pangs, we will solve for it, right? So how do you kind of then on at that position, how do you think of scaling, right? So it's just been a crazy, fantastic journey. And with all of this, like I said, even from going public, we are a public company. We've not gone public yet, but that entire journey of how do you make a company public ready? What does it mean to be able to live on a quarter on quarter sort of exercise? How do you kind of build with that almost near precision like predictability of how your next quarter would kind of fare, and what do you do to get there, right? So all of these things, I think, it's just been very, very different. That now obviously capital just becomes, again, it's still a very important catalyst, but that's not what is defining the company, right? The company is defined by the outcome that we produce, the quality that we stand for. And all of these investors over a period of time have added a lot of value towards thinking towards it. And one thing which was uniform across all of these guys is to say, over invest on professional sort of network for us to be able to do this, over invest on technology, over invest on building the culture of the company, right? So I think for all of them it was consistent throughout, and it's just been, I just think that, and I've seen, heard a lot of horror stories of how a lot of investors founder relation kind of break down. We've just been plain vanilla lucky to have like great guys believing each other, right? So
Amazing. What was your revenue when Matrix came in 2012?
2012, that year, this was, no, I know the number exactly. It was 28 crores that we would have. So it was a trailing. So FY 12, 11, 12, we would have closed revenue at 28 crores.
And what?
And EBITDA was about 34%. Uh, I don't think we've seen that EBITDA anytime after, but
Yeah, I can imagine. Uh, And
yeah,
this year, what did you close? 24, 25? Ballpark.
north of 1200 crores.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. What a phenomenal journey.
Yeah, it's just been crazy, man. It's just been crazy. I think more than anything, all of these things is just the sheer dawn of responsibility. Like the other day, we were looking in terms of what is our market share in Bangalore, and 3 out of 5 babies in our TG which are born are actually born under the Cloudnine banner, right? Which is one, that's huge goodwill, but it's also a tremendous responsibility on us to continue to do good, right? So that's a very important metric that we look at on what's our market share. So yeah, I mean, on those counts, it's just been crazy, man, and continues to grow.
So, you mentioned how Sequoia and Matrix had different approaches, or investor thesis, if I can use that term. What is your investor thesis now that you are a VC yourself?
Uh, so look, I think the commonality is, and again, I think look, it's also about the stage of investment. Um, Today, Akshay, like you would have also seen, the stages of investment are a lot more defined. If you're coming in at an idea stage, or you're coming in at a seed stage to growth stage and all of that, right? So we would like to call ourselves as someone who comes in at the seed stage where there is little bit of product market fit. We're not fussed on amplified revenues or something, but we need to know that there is avenues of being able to generate revenue. We're very fussed about looking at, what are the customer metrics, that how obsessed are they on the customer metric. With all of that, I think for me, the kind of investor behavior that I like to bring on the table is to look at capital infusion as just a one-time thing, right? And in good cases, maybe a couple of times, 3 times in their journey. But the capital infusion is one time, but what is it that you can do beyond that is what is important. And yes, I built a healthcare business, but I think I only bring the operator sentiment to this, or having been an entrepreneur sort of sentiment to this, which means the problems of scaling are the same whether you are building a technology company or building a healthcare company or building a logistics company or building a SaaS company. It's all the same. How do you build culture? How do you hire the right people? How do you kind of make sure processes are what they are? So for me, it's about being able to build that relatability with the founders, right? I am no one to kind of question what is the TAM that they're going after. Like if you had asked about TAM for Cloudnine, TAM was as big or as inexistent as it was, right? Because बच्चे तो पैदे हो रहे थे, right? Like it's not like we had a patented way of saying here's how you deliver, right? So no.
Yeah.
So I think it's left to the founder's imagination of how big the TAM can be. But we are just looking for certain validations to say that, this is how it will work. And that's where we are there to kind of support them, right? But for me, listen, Akshay, I am still trying to fit in as an investor. I am still trying to figure out institutional investing in terms of being able to do some of these things, right? I was a very happy angel investor, close to 70, 75 odd companies that I had invested in. Tremendous run with all of them, with literally me having to do nothing, right? And that's the sort of spot that I'd enjoyed. And now having to roll up your sleeves and actually work with founders in a one arm distance sort of restriction where you can see them doing something and you still can't kind of do something where you know as a founder, my prerogative was to find answers on everything, right? But now as an investor, you have to kind of ask questions so that that answers kind of find itself, right? It's a very different thing, and I'm still learning the trade of it. I have two amazing partners who are very, very good at it. So, I take the liberty of being able to just ride on what they are able to do on this. Um, but I think again, people kind of again as founders might and the relatability I was telling you about founders is to say that can we take the discussion away from pure capital as a commodity, right? Like I told you, it's one, two, three times that in their lifetime journey that our stage of investing we will be able to invest capital in. But can we help them focus on the problem and obsession about the problem rather than obsession of the solution, right? And that's what I try to kind of talk to them about. Because if you get obsessed on the solution, then you start telling everyone that my way is the best way of doing it without understanding if the problem has changed. But if you're solving for a particular problem, you will find that new solutions need to be kind of tweaked out every time, right? So for me, I am more this, and it's actually my partner's problem because I'm a yes man for everything. I like
Mhm.
everything we see.
Right.
I say yes to
The
everything which comes to the IC.
Yes, yes, yes.
But
I think the fundamental DNA of an entrepreneur is optimism, right? So it's hard to
I know.
bring in pessimism
Yeah.
of an investor. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's where the balance helps though. Like I said, I'm still learning, man. I'm a noob here.
Mm. Why transition into being a full-time investor? Why not just stay with Cloud9 till the IPO?
Yeah, so I mean that was the plan, right? Like in 22 when I transitioned out, the objective was that, we will transition into a public company and then I get to focus on this. The markets weren't the most recipient at at that time in 22, and which is why though we're a public company we didn't go through with the listing as a offering to through the IPO. But all of it, like I told you, in terms of behaving as a public company was already there, so I had already planned my transition out. Why institutional investing was, Akshay, and you asked me that question, how difficult was fundraising? So 2010, 2013, that entire period, I had actually kind of told myself that good entrepreneurs should not be going through this much struggle to raise capital, right? So in my naivety of thinking world won't change, I had said that I should do something about this, and I just put it on the top, back of my mind. Uh, Started with a small incubator, post a Sequoia investment where a lot of product companies come and build with me. Looked at how some of them scaled really well, and then realized that I'm missing out on the equity journey of those co-build sort of opportunities. 2015, put together a small family fund, started investing in a bunch of founders. It was largely orchestrated by the fact that Ashish, like I mentioned, was leaving my board to start off business. And we were so thick that I told him that even if he was selling cows, then that's a business I would want to be in with him, right? So that's the sort of level of trust that I knew that he's going to do something without realizing what off business does or what was even the business plan. But that required orchestration of pooling of some capital where we could then be a part of his journey, and that's opened up to be able to then build a good network of founders. uh, for me, honestly, Akshay, it was selfishly more than just being able to put that small capital, because listen, that capital would have made no difference to them in their journeys, but it was just being able to take some time with them,
Hmm.
and just learn off them, right? I told you earlier in the conversation that there were a lot of parallel industries that we were looking at. For me, the parallel conversations I used to have with a lot of these founders were exceptionally useful for me, right? So I continue to like that journey. 2017 started, participating on a few ICs of investors at that time who were coming up, and where I had a good network. I was able to kind of take some companies to the IC, was able to get myself invited to some of these IC, understand how a little bit of institutional investing decision making is taken. Um, and then in 2019, I became a scout for Sequoia. So I was amongst 20 odd people in the country at that time who could write a check on behalf of Sequoia, and now peak 15. So that was again a mad experience. Suddenly you have institutional capital that you can represent. You also have the power of the analyst and the associate layer. You kind of go a bit deeper and understand the technology, the team, the TAM, and all of that, which previously I wouldn't even question. With all of this, incrementally started thinking towards, if I had more time on my hands, what is it that I would do? And that's how in 22, when I knew that Ankur and Karthik, my partners at Peer Capital, were willing to be a part of this journey, it just made more sense to kind of, do this a lot more, right? So that's how the transition happened. So for me, it was at least a calibrated stepwise decision in terms of getting into institutional equity. Time will tell if this was a useful decision or not, but at least now I have to live with the decision.
Did you underestimate how hard it would be to run a VC firm?
Grossly underestimated. It is ridiculously hard. Um,
What are the things you've discovered that are super hard?
everything, man. It's just, it's one, it's not your capital. You are always in sell mode. I honestly thought, not being a founder, I don't need to be in sell mode because it honestly takes a lot out of you. But man, this is like 2x over again. No one told me it's going to be as difficult. Setting up a fund in India and working under the aegis of SEBI is again, the compliance requirement, and obviously for a very good cause, is very, very high, right? So you are then constantly digressing towards making sure you're on top of compliance on a lot of these aspects no one tells you about. And this is where having great partners helps, because that's something I don't even get into because Karthik, my partner, is just super good at all of these things because he's done this for decades. So and constantly searching for the next set of founders to be able to invest in. And like I said, the sell mode is for good founders will always have access to great quality of capital. How do you kind of become top of mind recall, right? I think it's very essential. So at least in the entrepreneurship journey for building Cloudnine, Akshay, it used to be, points in time where you are putting your mind towards raising capital, but then it's heads down, build, 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 right? यहाँ पे that is missing. You're in a day, you're having a range of conversations from someone who's interested in investing in you, or you are getting them interested in investing in us, to us investing in someone else, to nurturing the team, to building the brand. And it's complicated, man. It's
Is it
grossly underestimated, like I told you.
which part of the sales is harder, like selling to founders or selling to the LPs who invest in the fund?
I think selling to LPs right now, at least, it's actually a lot tougher. Again, simply because of the nuance that we are a first time fund, it was a lot harder. There is only so much that our networks was capable of, uh, being able to bring on board. But the first one, like they say, is always the hardest. We're thankful that a couple of large institutional investors also joined the investor table for us. But going forward, it is going to be largely more institutional investors. So that for me is also a journey because institutional investors look for a lot more data orientation than just, again, like I said, that, like some of us felt that this is a great opportunity. You can't just do that, right? So you have to have a lot of data and documentation towards it, right? So that's that's a large part of the learning for me, and it's not one conversation, actually. It's a lot of conversations, right? And um, in this sort of journey or version two of my life is, here you're not directly responsible for the outcome, right? In version one, you were to a large extent. Here, you are like a conduit, right? And you are allowing or catalyzing someone else to deliver that outcome on your behalf. So it's a very different sort of perspective that you have to deal with. And, increasingly over time, you will also find that there will be a lot more people like me, and it's actually a superb thing for the country to have as an ecosystem where a lot of founders also now come on this side to represent capital and build that relatability with founders, right? We still don't have enough. I think we need a lot more of this to happen. And which is where, again, so for investors, they'll obviously have choice of where do I deploy capital. So how do we put our hand up to be considered as top of mind for them is again a harder sort of thing to do, right? So I'm not saying pitching to founders is easy. Relatively, this is a lot tougher, right? Because ultimately, look, for founders, yes, we can sell ourselves, but there is a draw of capital, which kind of also has its own sort of bearing in terms of decision making, right? That capital is useful, whether us as a partnership are useful or not. But for the LPs, I think it's a lot harder conversation. So, which is why, for me at least, relative index, that's a lot tougher.
Does India have enough domestic capital for VC funds to tap, or are you going global?
No, at least for our fund one, which we closed shy of 40 million, Akshay, 98% was domestic. Um, there are some amazing institutions like SIDBI who encourage a lot of these fund managers to actually be able to bring in good avenues of capital. Um, we were told that just by the number of government initiatives, there's anywhere between 25 to 30% of the capital you are looking to raise can actually come through government surrogate institutions. Um, Purely from a planning perspective, it's another thing to be able to get it done, but there is avenue for that, right? And they are great gatekeepers to allow for other institutions like banks and insurance companies to also be able to follow suit and then be able to invest in. It is still obviously a very, very new asset class. Like we discussed, it's probably like a decade and a half old at its best. People have only now started seeing exit cycles. It's a largely illiquid sort of asset class, right? People are not very familiar with it. You would still find from an asset allocation of large family offices, you're competing with real estate to uh, debt products to public markets, right? So, in terms of just asset allocation as a percentage, venture would still be like low single digit to maybe close to double digits in terms of allocation, which means there is limited capital, right? Institutional investors. So a lot of us, as we grow into new tenors of funds of, let's say, fund two, fund three, uh, there is a lot more access of international sort of capital which comes in. Typically, fund one, a lot of people are risk averse, Akshay. So you don't really have a lot of them coming in. They'd love to do a wait and watch. They'll do a tracking. They'll engage with you. But typically, fund two onwards is where a lot of these guys would show interest. So hopefully, it's going to be a bit more different as we kind of look to get this one under the belt and then look at fund two.
Okay. I have a very similar set of questions, and you'll probably find them a bit repetitive. But what are the metrics that you would show when you're going out and pitching Fund 2? What metrics of Fund 1 matter to limited partners?
Um, Again, these are all learnings, so I'm sharing borrowed sort of learnings that I'm picking up on thanks to my partners. One is, look, depending on the timing. So, for example, we started in 2022, late 22, early 23. So we're about 2.5 years in our journey. Our investment journey itself is a period of 36 to 42 months. So which means 3 to 4 years is where we would actually invest, which means we're still investing from fund one.
How much
Uh,
is deployed so far?
about 57 odd percent is what we've deployed. We have 13 companies in our portfolio. We're looking at two more to join pretty soon. Idea is to get to about 20, 21 odd companies that we can put in our first checks. Few of them have already gone and demonstrated good growth, attracted follow-on capital. We've been able to participate in this follow-on rounds as well. So as a mix, depending on when we look to launch our fund two, uh, there are few parameters. One is in terms of market coverage to say that if in a certain sort of size of investment, the sector that we are focused on, did we get to see that particular opportunity which got invested, irrespective of outcome, right? So what is our coverage on the sectors that we're looking at becomes an important metric. Two, what is the amount of diligence that we do in terms of documenting a lot of these things, whether it's a yes or a no on these investments, right? Three, if we are able to show great MOIC, which is multiple on invested capital, it's great to have as a metric. Anything beyond 1.5 to 2, which means if you've deployed $10, if you're already looking at MOIC on paper at 20, you're a fantastic firm within this small period. But it's important to show that you have invested in companies which have gone on to raise capital at higher sort of valuation from where you entered at, right? So that MOIC is important. The golden truth moment is obviously being able to return that money, right? DPI as it's called. That is very early in our journey.
What is the full form of DPI?
DPI is distributed to paid in capital. Basically, if you've deployed $10 and have you been able to realize 10 or more, and you've been able to return that back to your investors, right? So
Which is
that is
a
what.
like a maybe a decade long journey, or I mean,
Yeah, so usually it is something which is looked at over the fund life. Between 8 to 12 years is typically what the fund lives are. So DPI is something which changes over a period of time, and which is why, like I said, early on you won't have DPI because the companies are scaling. Very few companies get acquired very early in their journey. So that DPI is a hard metric to kind of fashion, at least between fund one and fund two. But over a period of time, this becomes the important metric. MOIC and DPI becomes the very important metrics to say that one, you are able to invest in good companies. Two, you are also able to exit good companies, right? So that's these two become the critical factor. And then, of course, there's all the nuance of being able to again say that, what's the composition of us as GPs in the fund? What is our sort of shareholding? How are we nurturing a team? What is second level? Are we again looking to grow like an institution, or is this something that we will look to do till we are like 75 or 80 or become senile? What is it that we are actually kind of demonstrating? So some of the software aspects also go in. How much use of technology do we have? Much like I shared before, even here, from the very first opportunity that we've seen, we've been able to document it really well. There's a CRM which we use to be able to track everything that we do, even conversations over WhatsApp, email, in person. Everything comes and sits into one place so that it's easier for someone to kind of go into understanding the decision making or the rationale with which we are kind of investing. All of that comes into one place. So how do you keep everything institutional ready is what is important, right? So these are certain things that people kind of look for. And look again, like a public company, again, you have to close a lot of things quarterly. There's reporting which happens every quarter to SEBI, to your investors with utmost transparency in terms of every accounting to every single rupee and paisa that has come into the fund, to where is it deployed, how is it being used, all of those nuances, to how the portfolios are performing. If there is bad news to give, how do you call the bad news out? To if there's good news to share, obviously you'll be thrilled to share it. So a lot of these nuances, and generally in terms of also what is your sort of market rep, right? Like again, between fund one and fund two, it's a bit early to earn a market rep, but if there is referenceability, like can someone call up a founder and say, tell me about Rohit, right? So can you even do that? Or tell me about Ankur, or tell me about Karthik. So we have to live by that too, right? Because in today's connected world, it's pretty obvious that someone can actually do that. So it comes to some of the softer aspects as well. But yes, there is the outcome metrics, there is the softer aspects of culture and institutionalizing, and there is the referenceability.
Okay. What are industry benchmarks for MOIC and DPI?
But if you see global sort of context, you will see a lot of good parameters out there. And it's very different. I think the risk appetite there, the asset class, which is it's a fairly accepted asset class because your ability to generate outsized returns in most other avenues are non-existent, right? Here, real estate is still fairly accessible for most people. Gold, for example, various other avenues, right? So public markets continue to kind of do well. So for most of them, like even for example, our bank's interests are like 7%, which is like great, right? So you don't have that in most developed countries. So this is established as a fairly good asset class to actually generate outsized returns. So the risk appetite is higher. The ability to harness technology. So for example, in the US, not that you can't do it here, but in the US, you can actually go and list with zero revenue, right? Simply
Hmm.
because you
Yep.
have a parent to your
True.
name. You have something which
Amazon
is
made
highly
losses
protected.
for years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So you can actually go and do a lot of those things and encourage for it. Here we don't have that high of a risk appetite, right? Like you saw some of the startups which actually went and listed that if you weren't profitable very soon, you get beaten up for it, right? So we're not there yet as a country. So some of these things kind of shape the way you are able to drive outcomes, right? So we have to wait for a lot more throughput out of Indian sort of investment context to be able to see that. We've already got some great outcomes, like I mentioned. Bloom has put out a lot of these things as Omega files to, talk about outcomes are reported. It's fantastic to see that on what's DPI, what's MOIC, and so on. But they've all had history, right? They've all had that sort of history to be able to do that. So yeah, but generally the asset class in our country is a very, very early sort of asset class.
So, you like to convert decision making into a process. What is the process through which you decide whom to fund? Are there like some clear checkboxes, clear parameters? How much is intuitive? How much is a science?
Oh, so look, there is between art and science, I think it's a fine balance. Um, the fact that I think there will be a significant emphasis on the founder quality itself at the stage of where we invest our first check is actually largely overbearing than everything else, right? Yes, we want to draw comfort on the fact that what is the market they're going after? Is it existent, non-existent? Is it a beachhead? Is it a, more about being able to create efficient throughput? Is it about them being able to showcase what is their founder market fit to to say, why are they the best sort of people to be able to tackle this problem today and here and now, right? So some of these nuances we will actually over-index a lot on the founder, draw a lot more comfort on, like I said, market, exitability, horizon of staying invested in an asset of that nature. There is a lot more science to it because if there are established avenues of what is the willingness to pay, established avenues of being able to charge someone new for a particular aspect versus being able to do something cheaper, faster. We have to kind of understand these things, right? Because ultimately, look, someone is paying for this service. So if that willingness is not there, then what is he or she trying to build? If it
Hmm.
is India to India, India to the world, very different context. So we kind of understand some of these things, but look, intuition, gut feel is a very critical factor, right? And again, it needs to be balanced out with some of us on the investment committee to say where huge amount of optimism is not enough, right? It's also being able to look at practicality of some of these things from a fitment point of view. Even if you're the fourth team to actually attempt the same problem, what makes you different? It's not to say that everything first three gets it and that's it, right? It doesn't work like that. So how do you kind of look at some of these things is very important. So largely to do with founders, everything we kind of do from referenceability. Yes, there is intuitiveness and gut feel, but you also back it with a lot of process. You go and talk to a lot of people. You have to kind of have a very high bar on referenceability for the founders. And again, in today's day and age, it's very easy to kind of do this. You would know someone in the alumni, someone in their ex, workplace, and so on, right? So uh, there is that veracity with which you kind of adapt processes into some of these things. But yeah, it's a combination of these, actually.
Okay, fascinating. While you want capital to be something that your portfolio companies raise once or at max three times, but at the same time, you have a pressure to show MOIC, and to show MOIC, you need to have your portfolio companies raise follow-on rounds. Isn't there like a little bit of a inherent conflict in the
No, no, what I
VC
meant
model?
was, yeah, no, what I meant was that we be able to participate in at least 2 to 3 times of their capital raising journeys. It
Ah,
is
okay,
not to say that
okay,
they only raise for so many. Yes,
got
they
it,
need
got
to
it, got it.
raise
Okay.
sufficient
Hmm.
amounts of capital to be able to prove their thesis out. I just meant that our ability to partake in some of those rounds, right? Like if someone raises up to Series B, Series C, we can only participate or hold our position from C to Series A, Series B. Series C onwards is where we actually look to exit, right? So someone who's on the anvil of being able to raise consistent capital periodically well and fast, it's the best thing that can happen.
Right, right, right. Okay. Though a lot of people criticize the VC model for that, like the fact that there is this inherent pressure of VC funded businesses to continue to raise because the backers, which is the VCs, need to show MOIC. And so, do you
I
agree
mean,
with that criticism?
yeah, I mean, look, everything has its fair sense of criticism also, right? Like that way, if you look at why do we invest in public markets, right? We just know that that money is actually going to get compounded. Now, who are you selling to? You are selling to another shareholder who believes that there is ability to grow from here. So private markets are no different that way, right? It's just that it is a far more secluded sort of capital or asset of that nature, which is not accessible to everyone. But by nature of what it is, yes, everyone is coming in with the financial prudence to say that I need to be better off at the time of exit than my entry. So it is that. But look, I think the good founders will obviously find a way to say that at every stage of them being able to raise capital, they will find avenues for it to be able to grow in value, right? Be it public or private market, and that's really what we have to believe in, yeah. And look, sometimes like I told you on the inherent business risk versus inherent scaling risk, right? There's different for different people, right? Like I said, PE likes to come in with just the scale risk, not business risk. But in VC, you have to go in for business risk, which means you will deploy that capital, and as he or she starts building towards achieving their thesis, you will find that there will be more people who will come and get attracted to the fact that what he or she is building is of value. So that's where the value gets created. So it's not just saying, MOIC is important. MOIC is important in anything that we do. It's a house that we buy, the car that we drive, not true with a car, it depreciates for
Yeah,
tax purposes.
right.
But,
Hmm.
we just know that anything we do, it has to have more value at the time of exit, right? So
Hmm.
it's the same.
Hmm. Mhm. Okay, okay, got it. Do you buy into the AI hype, uh, or do you think this is a bubble in terms of how it's influencing your decision on which companies to invest in?
So, look, it's definitely not a bubble, Akshay. And I'm there's this old Gartner technology graph, which is I think more than a decade or maybe 2010 or 11 or something, I don't know, where if you have X and Y axis, X axis being time, Y axis being expectation over time, right, you will see a lot of these things. And we spoke about internet. I grew up in the era where internet was a fad. Was all of these will go through a cycle, and it goes through a very strong technology trigger. It goes up on huge hype expectation, and probably where towards the weaning off of something like this is where AI is today. And why it's important is because it goes to a negative trough where you will find detractors, you will find a fair amount of criticism, you will find a fair amount of mortality of people who are trying to ride on this wave, to it becoming something which is very negative, and then finding its plateau of productivity. So it'll actually go like this and then go like here, right? So people who've been able to ride this curve and then get to plateau of productivity is where the real outcome is, right? And we've seen a lot of good businesses going through a lot of these to actually be able to sustain or wither away. AI, I think, is going through the peak of its AI hype cycle and then actually becoming a way of life. So you will see a fair sense of negativity which will bring this down, but then you will see that this becomes a way of life, right? So this over a period of time, given how technology itself is progressing, this time itself is shrinking. So this axis itself is shrinking. So today, is AI a hype? I think what a lot of people, where it's very superficial and not owning up data and building true nuances, yes, it's a hype. um, are there a lot of people riding the hype and saying, "Here's what I can do"? Yes, right? I mean, it is a way of life. But I think the for us, what we look at is to try and go a bit deeper. So, for example, a lot of, let's say, hardcore strong LLMs or hard infra AI like a Krutrim or a Sarvam and all of that requires tremendous amount of capital from the word go. That's not for us. And it's for us to also be able to realize to say that we can't possibly even have a play there, right? Even if we have access, we can't play there. But we have to play on the application front of all of these things to say that yes, there are great models which will come out. How do I use that? And be very careful with the fact that the pace of technology, that what is a great product today is just becoming a feature tomorrow. So how do you kind of do this? And we don't live in an isolated world, unlike our neighbors, where we say that, great tech, you keep it, we'll build our own, right? We allow for everything to come in. So even if we haven't built something on our own, like, a significant number of users on ChatGPT are coming from India. GitHub, largest number of hits are from India. So, there are so many things which are happening, which is very global in nature. So, how do you even play to some of those things is very important. So, you will still find that there are some founders who have like great fit in this to use that sort of technology, their nuance of what they were trying to do, and then being able to build it, right? So, just that hardcore AI cannot be something which will be there. And you will see this across everything that we do in terms of a lot of these things becoming real, right? So, for example, it was recently announced that now it's not just Google which will be the search engine. Like Perplexity is now coming onto Samsung and Motorola phones as the primary sort of search instead of Gemini, which was there till date, right? So you will see a lot of these things changing because inherently different models which will come in and say, here's a new way of life. But over a period of time, you will see that everything will have AI in it, right? Like, for example, this podcast we're recording, I'm pretty sure previously, if you were using four people to kind of help you edit, today you'll use tools which you probably need two people to kind of help you edit, right? So
Yeah.
these are things which we have to accept that these are there, right? So it's about just being able to have meaningful conversation, unlock a couple of layers at least to be able to understand if what they're building has the veracity to stand the test of time, or if it is more, like I said, more a product which becomes a feature tomorrow, right? So I think that's what we have to be a bit careful about. We are cautious, we are optimistic, but we are cautious. We have two companies which are AI native. We will probably have one more which will be AI native,
In what
selling
space?
to. One is in enterprise SaaS. Another is in sports analytics, and another one hopefully will be in gaming. So we'll see.
Wow. Okay. Last question to you. What what kind of founder and what stage of business should approach you for funding? Like, if you'd like to receive pitches, then are there any suggestions you have that, in terms of your ideal founder profile, that you'd like to receive pitches from?
Oh, we don't have a founder profile as such. I mean, we are not.
Or
Those
even
ones who
stage of
say,
business or sector.
yeah, so stage is more easier to define. Um, so typically our ability to invest capital, Akshay, and this will I'll tell you why I'm talking about this is, we typically invest between uh, 8 crores to 12 crores. So between around about a million to million and a half. And with all of this, we usually want to have about 12 to 15% of the underlying company that we invest in, right? So this kind of gives a sense in terms of the stage that we invest in some cases strong founders, repeat founders, who have access to good quality capital, maybe in their idea stage itself, get subscription of this nature, not just us but someone else, to be able to kind of raise this sort of capital. For some others you may have to prove some things out, like I said, to have a little bit of product market fit and so on, then be able to attract attention from the likes of us, right? So it's a combination of both. But someone who's scaled beyond this, to say that if they're raising like a 4 5 million round, obviously our million at 12 to 15% is not something that they can construct, because then you're giving away like 50 60% of the company, which is ridiculous. So that's not a fit for us, right? So it's early stage. It's either idea or seed is what we typically kind of do. In terms of sector, the overarching theme that we have is we are in the consumption enablers, right? We want to back consumption enablers. So it basically can split into everything across consumer tech. It can be enterprise solutions, it can be B2B business enablers. It can be gaming is a core subset of what we do because Karthik is very good at it. Healthcare is something that we actively look at because I have access to it. So some of these is what we largely look at, right? So this is
What do
in
you
a
mean by
nutshell of what we do.
consumption enabler? Like, are you saying?
Yeah, so anyone, so okay, let's look at it this way. Consumption enablers is basically, let's say, so there is huge amount of consumption appetite which is growing in the country in terms of new brands being created, new things which is more aspirational and so on. So one is to invest in some of these new age brands and such, right? We are not looking at that. We are not looking at D2C brands. We're not looking at new brands creation, but there's a whole big layer which enables this sort of growth and consumption to happen. So, for example, if it is through logistics, if it is through financial sort of cadence, if it is through better throughput on this, if it is supply chain, all of these things we kind of, because we feel that irrespective of one or two winners who will come out of the actual category, if there are enablers, we actually kind of want to be in the meteor layer here, right? So that's what we mean by consumption enablers. And this is
Interesting. And
across like health and all of
hmm.
that too.
And this is not a winner take all market, right? Like the consumption enablers.
Not necessarily. You will have at least, yeah, you will have good competition of at least some three to four in this, right? So you can still be late to the party and still find your good kick, right? So